Hold a single kernel of popcorn in your hand, and you are holding a dormant bomb. To get this hard little seed to detonate from the inside out requires roughly 135 pounds per square inch of pressure. That is a higher pressure than you will find inside a champagne bottle or a fully inflated car tire. Contrary to the common assumption, heat is not the primary mechanical cause of the pop. Heat is only the trigger. The actual mechanical force driving the explosion is extreme internal pressure built up by trapped water. For this reaction to happen, 3 exact thermodynamic conditions have to meet: a biological shell with massive tensile strength, a precise volume of working fluid, and a specific structural breaking point. Understanding the mechanics inside the pot requires analyzing the kernel as a highly calibrated microboiler. If you remove or alter even one variable in this closed system, the entire phase change fails completely, leaving you with a scorched, unpopped seed. Every pop is an orchestrated, violent display of material science and thermodynamics. Ordinary sweet corn and popcorn share the exact same basic anatomy, but they react to thermal load entirely differently. This kernel cross-section shows 3 layers. The outer pericarp is dense and non-porous. Locked inside the middle endosperm is the working fluid, exactly 14% liquid water. When heated, these water molecules absorb energy, vibrate rapidly, and attempt to turn into steam. In ordinary corn, the softer, porous hull lets steam safely seep out through microscopic holes, drying out the seed until it scorches. Popcorn's non-porous pericarp acts as an absolute seal. Vapor molecules slam into the inner hull but cannot escape. This trapped vapor forces the internal boiling point far beyond a normal 100 degrees Celsius. A kitchen pressure cooker manages this process using a safety valve to bleed off excess steam. The kernel has no valve. Internal pressure scales upward until the system hits catastrophic structural failure. The sheer tensile strength of the hardened hull is the sole reason this intense internal pressure can build in the first place. While the outer shell holds back the mounting pressure, the internal payload absorbing that force is the dense, white, starchy endosperm. This microscopic diagram displays the rigid, crystalline packets of the starch payload. As heat and pressure scale, it undergoes gelatinization. The granules absorb trapped superheated moisture, swelling outward and losing their rigid shapes entirely. The internal payload transforms from a dry solid into a superheated, highly pressurized molten gel. The heat climbs until the internal temperature reaches a critical threshold of roughly 180 degrees Celsius. Concurrently, the outward force pushing against the straining pericarp hits exactly 135 pounds per square inch, or 9.2 atmospheres. The kernel is now a maximally strained microboiler, holding a volatile molten payload directly on the brink of structural collapse. The kinetic reaction begins the precise instant the pericarp reaches its material limit. At its weakest structural point, the hull cracks. That single fracture triggers an instantaneous release, immediately dropping the 135 psi of internal pressure. This sudden depressurization causes an explosive phase change. The superheated liquid water flashes into vapor in a fraction of an eye blink. That rapidly expanding vapor forces the molten starch outward. It foams up like a balloon, inflating to 40 or 50 times its original size. The moment the expanding hot foam hits the cooler ambient air, it rapidly freezes into the rigid, airy flake you eat. Which brings us to the acoustic phenomenon of the reaction. What exactly is that cheerful popping sound coming from the pot? This timeline maps high-speed footage against an audio waveform. Notice a misconception. The pop is not the physical sound of the rigid hull snapping. The pop is actually pressurized steam rushing out of the new fissure at supersonic speeds. The mechanical crack of the shell happens silently. The audible bang follows a fraction of a second later, the moment the vapor breaches the gap. The familiar rhythm of popping is the auditory signature of a sudden thermodynamic phase change. You're hearing dozens of microscopic pressure vessels exhaling all at once. But in every batch, there is an anomaly. Some kernels absorb the same heat, sit at the bottom, and stubbornly refuse to pop. The first condition that creates one of these failed seeds is a structurally compromised pericarp. If a kernel has a microscopic fracture or a thin spot in its hull, it bleeds steam as it heats. The system can never reach the required 135 psi, preventing the explosion entirely. The second, far more common failure condition has nothing to do with material strength. It is a depletion of fuel caused by moisture loss. This data scatterplot maps exactly how strict the tolerance window is for the working fluid. To achieve maximum volumetric expansion, the kernel's internal moisture content must peak at exactly 14. If the moisture drops too far below that threshold, there simply is not enough liquid water inside to act as a working fluid. Without that volume to flash into steam, the explosive phase change cannot be driven. Commercial popcorn producers rely entirely on this physics. They actively calibrate and engineer seed batches to hit this exact 14% moisture specification before bagging. Those leftover kernels at the bottom of the bowl are microboilers that failed inspection. Missing a single physical tolerance parameter completely prevents the structural collapse required for the pop. Consider a standard bowl of perfectly popped popcorn. Every flake exists because 3 mandatory components aligned flawlessly: an intact high-tensile shell, a calibrated 14% moisture payload, and sufficient thermal load. What you are eating is an instantly frozen chunk of gelatinized starch foam. The fading rhythm of pops echoing from the kitchen is the sound of dozens of microscopic boilers successfully failing. The unpopped duds left over at the bottom are the instances where the material tensile strength successfully withstood the buildup of internal pressure, or where the working fluid ran dry. This sequence provides a clean, accessible demonstration of precise thermodynamic phase changes. Understanding the rigid, systematic physics behind this single explosion upgrades our awareness of the hidden mechanical rules governing the simplest objects in our homes.